Tales from a Jurassic World, Season 3, Episode 5, Justice. Birds were tweeting in the sunlight as trees swayed gently in the breeze. The warm summer weather not too unusual for California at this time of year. Fran Marshall was enjoying being outside for a change. Since things had changed with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, Marshall had moved into a new position within the Department for Prehistoric Wildlife. Her job had largely become coordinating ground operations and asset transfers, with the department increasingly sending more and more resources to the valley BioSyn operated from in Italy. There had been trouble in the DPW, however, with corruption rife and illicit deals nearly bringing the organisation to its knees, so Marshall had her work cut out. She had heard about the incident which Morrison and Brown had responded to in Los Angeles, but hadn't had a chance to catch up with Morrison, given he had largely went off the grid after he went to work for BioSyn. Now, out of the blue, he had contacted her, wanting to meet up at a relatively low-key cafe. She wasn't sure what he wanted to meet about, but she knew Ben, and choosing to meet somewhere like this wouldn't be an accident. She took a sip from an iced coffee which sat on the table in front of her, and watched as the man walked across towards her, looking much more weathered than when she had last laid eyes on him.
Ben,
she said, getting to her feet to embrace him.
I'm so sorry about Lucy. I tried to contact you afterwards, but couldn't find you anywhere. You know, if you need to talk, I'm here. We could...
Thanks, Fran.
He replied as he sat down opposite her and placed a folder on the table between them.
Maybe we can talk another time, but for now, I'm here with something much more serious.
Marshall began to flick through the papers. There were BioSyn documents referencing encounters with new species of dinosaur, and photographs of an empty box truck and a cage inside what appeared to be an airport hangar.
What are you showing me, Ben?
Over the past few months, I've had encounters with animals which were never released from Lockwood Manor. At first, I thought they were an anomaly, but then it kept happening. At the last call-out I was on, I found this in the hangar. The design is patented to BioSyn. Even your teams aren't using these cages. BioSyn have to be involved in the release of these animals.
That's a heck of an accusation. If I was to take this to the right people, it might be enough to shut them down. But we'd need proof. Is this all you've got?
For now, yes. Although there is also this.
He reached into his pocket and placed down a photograph of Anton Orlov.
BioSyn were working with Orlov directly in the Netherlands. Claim the CIA has released him to help with their operation.
That's not true.
Marshall responded as she scowled.
The Dangerous Species Division have been looking for him for months.
The two sat in silence for a few moments. The full scale of the situation in front of them was now beginning to dawn on them.
What are you going to do?
Marshall asked as she broke the silence.
Go back to the Dolomites. Gather as much evidence as I can. Shut the thing down for good.
Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? If these people are working with Orlov, it'll be dangerous.
I'm sure, Fran. It's what Lucy would do. I'll send over the evidence as soon as I got it.
A few days passed and Morrison was back in the Dolomite Mountains and at the BioSyn facility. His plan was simple. He would head to the laboratories to see if he could find any evidence of new assets created by the company, and he would then head to King's office to encounter him and see if he could get some kind of confession from the man. He didn't know how deep this went. He was unsure whether Dodgson, the CEO of the company, knew what King was up to, but he wouldn't be surprised if he had been involved. Lewis Dodgson had a reputation for groundbreaking work within the biogenetic sphere, but his work often stole from rival competitors and reverse engineered their projects for his gain. Morrison was very aware that he was dealing with some dangerous people. He was angry that he had allowed his grief to trick him into working for such a despicable company. The past few months of his life had been spent furthering a dangerous agenda. He was done with it. He had to make this right. It's what Lucy would have wanted him to do, even if she wasn't here to do it with him. Morrison made his way down the steps inside the large concourse room of the facility, making sure to ignore the security guards who were stood around the space in black uniforms. A few other members of personnel were sat around, and a few people could be seen getting coffee from a barista. Morrison completely disregarded the room around him, instead scanning his wristband at an elevator in the corner of the room and heading down to the laboratory level. Making sure that nobody was following him, he stepped out into the amber-tinted corridor. He carried himself with a sense of purpose. Eventually he came to a glass doorway, and inside could see a small tree growing next to a couple of glass containment cells. Walking into the room, Morrison looked around the environment. He noticed stairs heading to an upper level, and a handful of scientific desks and computers around the room. Satisfied that he was in the right space, he walked across to the containment pods. Inside, he found exactly what he was expecting. Morris Intrepidus, contained inside the glass holding cells with information about their growth dotted around them. He pulled out his phone, taking a couple of photographs, when he was interrupted.
Excuse me, what are you doing in here?
Morrison turned to see a man with grey hair sat in a wheelchair in the middle of the room. He wore a lab coat and was looking sternly at Morrison. Instinctively, he leant forward, shaking the man's hand.
I'm Ben Morrison. I've been sent down here on behalf of Howard King. You are?
Dr. Daniel Regis.
Ah, yes, Dr. Regis. King said I might find you down here. He is preparing an update for Dodson and wanted me to review some of the projects in the facility.
I see. What is it that I can help you with?
Regis replied, wheeling himself over to the containment cells so he could look at the animals inside.
King just wanted me to fact-check a couple things. Some of the details got a little confused. Can you remind me when these specimens were first hatched?
This batch was hatched 6 months ago, but the batches in the forest have been there for at least a year, possibly a bit longer. Dr. Kurtz was involved with them. I can ask her to come down if you'd like.
Should be fine with the vague estimates. Thank you, Doctor.
Morrison said as he scribbled the details down in a notebook which he had pulled from a pocket.
Can you just remind me of the status of the other animals we've hatched so far, too?
You know, that's a pretty long list, son.
Regis replied as he eyed Morrison suspiciously.
You're right. Let's try another strategy. Any major updates Dodson should be aware of?
You can let him know that the Giga is settling into the valley well. Seems to want to rival the Tyrannosaurus for alpha status, but we did predict that. Only other real note is the Ferrocenosaurus has been slightly more aggressive than we initially expected.
Understood. I'll make sure King informs Dodson. Thank you, Doctor.
Morrison went to turn and walk away, but the doctor called after him for a moment.
Ben, are you new here? Howard has never mentioned you, and I haven't seen you here before.
Morrison turned, smiling softly.
No, I usually work in the field. I'm doing some important project work at the moment, though. Very hush-hush, as I'm sure you understand, but the work I'm doing with King will change things massively for BioSyn. Thank you again for your time, Doc. I really appreciate it.
Morrison turned, pocketing the notebook and quickly walking away from the laboratory. He got back into one of the elevators and went up to the atrium space again, quickly climbing the staircases as he passed a handful of people. He had evidence of BioSyn creating other creatures. Hell, the doctor had inadvertently given him way more information than he realized. Now, he just needed evidence of the illicit behaviour of individuals within the company, and he'd have enough evidence to do something about whatever was going on. He climbed the stairs to the higher levels of the facility, entering a corridor which was lined with offices. He passed an office marked Dodgson and continued down the hallway, eventually coming to King's office. He knocked for a moment and waited, but there was no response. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Quickly, Morrison crept inside, shutting the door behind him before he sat at King's desk and attempted to power up the computer which sat on top. The computer flicked into life, and for a moment Morrison was presented with a challenge he wasn't sure he could crack. A password screen popped up, but Morrison remembered the UV light he carried in his equipment pack for investigations in the field and sprayed some fluorescent solution on the keyboard. He waited a couple of moments for fingerprints to appear and saw that 5 keys were pressed the most. ORNSA. He sat for a few moments thinking and looked across the office. He noticed a photograph sat in a frame. He got up and walked across to it. It was a much younger King stood in front of a sign which read InGen Site B, alongside a couple of other BioSyn operatives. He thought for a few moments, and then it clicked in his head. Sauna. The island where InGen had bred the animals which were used in both Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, and an island which he had become more familiar with since joining BioSyn. He went back to the desk and typed in the password, and the screen beeped, unlocking.
I've got you now, King.
He managed to get into King's emails fairly quickly. The man clearly left them logged in for ease of access. As he flicked through the email chains, it became clear that there was something much more interesting going on here. Dodgson had tasked King with finding a way to gain BioSyn more influence within the dinosaur containment business. It seemed as if King's solution had been to release more animals into the wild. There was correspondence between King and various agents, all codenamed to protect their identities, about drop-offs occurring in the wild. Disturbingly, some agents appeared to be from the DPW, whilst other operatives were BioSyn assets. Morrison proceeded to download as many of the email chains as he could into a folder on the desktop of the computer. He then searched for the name Orlov and found an email exchange with the man, detailing how King's agreement to let him go free would mean a transfer of velociraptors to BioSyn. Morrison had the smoking gun he had been looking for. He saved the email chain with Orlov into the same folder, compressed it, and emailed everything across to Marshall from King's account. Convinced that he had done enough to prosecute the man, Morrison got up and left the office, deciding it was finally time to encounter him. As he walked down the corridor back towards the concourse, a BioSyn security guard began to walk down from the other end. Morrison felt himself get tense.
Morrison!
What's up?
King is looking for you in the loading bay. Says he needs your help with something.
No problem. I'll begin.
Morrison was cut off as an explosion erupted somewhere in the facility. The corridor suddenly illuminated in a bright orange fireball which blinded both men as it burst into the sky outside. An alarm began to blare inside the facility, the security guard reaching up to his earpiece.
Morrison, we need to get out of here now!
Morrison pushed the door to the office in front of them open, his eyes fixated on what he could see outside. He looked through the windows into the black night beyond. The usual quiet tranquility of BioSyn Valley now erupted into smoky ruin as some fiery swarm of animals descended into the sky, setting trees and buildings in the valley alight with flames. Morrison thought King would be the biggest issue he'd face today, but from the look of it, things were about to get much, much worse. You have been listening to Tales from a Jurassic World. Ben Morrison voiced by Jared Ransom, Fran Marshall voiced by Dot Paws, Dr. Daniel Regis voiced by Jurassic World Biology, BioSyn Operative voiced by Ryan Rogers. Music arranged and composed by Brooks Leiby. Intro and outro music performed by the famed Studio Orchestra. Sound effects from Epidemic Sound. Written, created and produced by Tom Jurassic. Tales from a Jurassic World follows BioSyn as they adapt to dinosaurs in the wild.